Hello there, Commonwealth from here. And as we have reached the second half of August, and not much has been happening in Ocarina of Time Remake after the June reveal and Zelda 40th anniversary minus leaks, where we have the logo, system, controller with the boxes of the controller pointing more and more towards that this leak is authentic, is true. And then the question is, of course, how far are we away from a reveal, an announcement from Nintendo? And what Skyward Bound on Twitter/X posted is that in the news tab, we have seen Zelda stuff show up again, but they're also promoting it with Ocarina of Time Remake as a part of it. A lot of people are saying Zelda Direct, and once again Zelda Direct. And yes, it is a possibility. By all indications, we have seen now throughout 2026 that Nintendo is doing game-specific directs. We've seen this with Star Fox, we've seen this now with Fire Emblem Fortune's Weave. And equally so, Ocarina of Time Remake is probably a favorite of the old Zelda games. It's the highest rated game of all time, and it has a timeless status, despite technically not hanging up with times, hence why the remake. But at the same time, we have to ask ourselves, does this game and the Zelda 40th anniversary need a dedicated Nintendo Direct? The Legend of Zelda has never had a dedicated Nintendo Direct. And you would say, oh, but Star Fox didn't have that before either. That is true. But why do games get dedicated Directs in the first place? And which franchises do get dedicated Directs? When it comes to those that sell, I can only think of Super Smash Bros. And Mario Kart. Mario Kart has had dedicated presentations both on the Wii U and on the Nintendo Switch 2, while Super Smash Bros. Has had its own presentations, especially during the Switch generation. So why not Zelda? It is among the top sellers, but the answer to that is Zelda really among those that needs a Direct of its own? Like, sure, it would be cool for Zelda 40th Anniversary Direct, but doesn't it make more sense to have it as a part of Nintendo Direct? But franchises can get overshadowed in those Directs. Like we saw that with Fire Emblem Fortune's Weave. It was present in the June Direct, but it was completely overshadowed by Zelda Ocarina of Time Remake. The same was the case for Nintendo Switch Sports. The way I think Nintendo is thinking is, what games do need dedicated Directs to have a chance of performing and reaching the goals that we have? And that is the thing. What would a September Direct even be without Zelda Ocarina of Time Remake? Without the Zelda 40th anniversary stuff? Not much, really, when you think about it. It would probably remove the need for it, for the Zelda Direct dream to happen, because it's never happened before. Or you don't have a September Direct, and then in October you have a dedicated Nintendo Direct for The Legend of Zelda. And personally, I would prefer to see this game earlier. I would prefer to see it in September. Now that we see that we're getting to Gamescom, and unless we get a surprise Direct of Zelda Ocarina of Time Remake, much like we saw with Kirby Air Riders in 2025, and then playable demo at the same convention, it is a peculiar and difficult situation for Nintendo in general to just have a Zelda Direct, at least not until very close to release. And that is because that will overshadow everything. A Fire Emblem Fortune's Weave Direct or Star Fox Direct is not going to overshadow anything. But a Zelda Direct, whether it's a 40th anniversary one or just a dedicated one for Ocarina of Time Remake, will overshadow everything. I'm actually going to the point where I think it's more likely that we see a Zelda Direct, yes, but for the movie, because that's what we've seen for the Super Mario Bros. Movie and then Super Mario Galaxy movie, where they had dedicated Directs. First, have Zelda as part of Nintendo Direct. The crowd pleaser in many ways. The way to get Zelda fans to watch and also leave them satisfied and not complaining. Either starting with it, like with Super Mario Bros. 40th anniversary last year in 2025, and that one started on September 12th. Guess what is ending then on the same day, probably? Mario's 40th anniversary. And what could be starting on the same day in a Nintendo Direct? Zelda's 40th anniversary. Now, of course not, it's not going to be September 12th, as that is a Saturday. More likely that it's going to be probably Tuesday the 8th. There's also a possibility of the week before, Tuesday the 1st, because we know there's nothing Mario coming out anymore, so the anniversary is pretty much finished. While we know that in September we are getting a Zelda amiibo in the form of Minoru tied to the launch day of Fire Emblem Fortune's Weave. And that makes it logical to just start with a 40th anniversary segment. Start with the movie, making a tease of it per se, and also, of officially announce the cast that was already leaked. You can put in smaller games that you may have for The Legend of Zelda, whether it's tied to the NES, the system, which we know is NES themed when it comes to the controller especially. And the same goes really when we think about it with Ocarina of Time Remake. You could also add in, at least in the Western presentation, the book. That is to say, Secrets of the Zonai, the English equivalent of Masterworks Tears of the Kingdom, and Minoru Amiibo, plus any other Amiibo announcements you may have. Personally, I'm of course dreaming of Ocarina of Time Child Link, the hero of time, pulling the Master Sword. That would be an absolutely dream come true. There are many possibilities here. I don't expect to see Zelda Ocarina of Time Remake until September. Unfortunately. That could mean September 1st, so the week after Gamescom, because Gamescom has already announced that the big demo there is going to be Nintendo Switch Sports Resort. Yes, Kirby Air Riders was present there, and that was a surprise announcement, but I just don't see that happening twice. It would be nice if a Zelda Direct is happening, it's happening during Gamescom, plain and simple as that. Otherwise, we're going to see this game again in a September Direct, starting out with the 40th anniversary, getting the announcement from Nintendo of the logo, even though we all know how it looks now, based on the leaked boxes of both the system and controller, but most importantly, we get to see a proper trailer, not just a teaser of Zelda Ocarina of Time Remake. One that will show early sections of the game and maybe a little tease of Adult Hero of Time. I think they're gonna spread this out though a little bit more. I don't think it's gonna be much more than a trailer, and I think they're gonna save a deeper dive into the game at a later point. That is actually a little bit similar to what we saw also with Tears of the Kingdom, and it's also one of the reasons I'm skeptical about having a dedicated Zelda Ocarina of Time Direct or 40th Anniversary Direct, is that with Mario it worked so well in that September Direct last year. It made it memorable and worthwhile. You started with something big and an anniversary and everything tied to it, and then ended with the reveal of a new game, and I think that is something Nintendo could pull off again. Unless, of course, it's 3D Mario, because then 3D Mario would overshadow Zelda, which would go against its grain. And in that situation, yes, a Zelda Direct would make sense, and preferably actually it would have to be before that Direct at Gamescom, and then have a little reminder and maybe even the release date announcement in the September Direct, much like you did with Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment, where we got a trailer in the partner showcase in July. Let's also remember we haven't had a partner showcase in a while, so that could be what happens around Gamescom week. And then Zelda is coming back in September, say 2 months before the launch of the remake. And with it, since it is such a short span of time, we get the release date as well, and box art plus pre-orders. But of course, after that, it's a more open game. We could see one of two things. Number one is the dreamed of Zelda Direct, which makes sense when we get to late October, especially the week after Nintendo Switch Sports Resort is out. That one is out on the 22nd of October. If you do it on the 29th, it would be fitting with Halloween, since we don't really have a Halloween game this year, and we know how dark Ocarina of Time can be. So if you have a dedicated Zelda Direct there and then focus on the dark stuff, Bottom of the Well, maybe even Shadow Temple, or Dark Link even, that would be great stuff. There is also a different option, one that Eiji Aonuma probably would bring up himself, and that is playing the actual game, giving us proper first gameplay before any previews of the game, which we saw in the case of Tears of the Kingdom in 2023. And that was also when we got the announcement and reveal of the themed system, Pro Controller, and case. The system had leaked long in advance, much like we've seen in this situation. But I think that could be actually an interesting way of covering Ocarina of Time Remake, especially since a lot of the changes that will be applied to this remake will be tied to the camera, to how they have upgraded certain locations, especially Castletown. And I wouldn't be surprised if that is exactly what producer Eiji Aonuma does. Either that or dungeons, because he started with dungeon design in Ocarina of Time. That was the start of his Zelda journey, and as a part of the Zelda team at Nintendo. And he quickly grew to a role of director with Majora's Mask, and then eventually producer to become the head of the franchise that he is during this 40th anniversary, and could be all the way to the 50th. Those are the two options after seeing the game in a September Direct, if there isn't a Zelda Direct beforehand. The most realistic one is we see it again in September Direct. We see maybe a little trailer here or some screenshots posted by Nintendo before Nintendo Switch Sports Resort is out, and then some gameplay from Eiji Aonuma. That is the marketing strategy that works so well for both Tears of the Kingdom, but also in a way Echoes of Wisdom. That game also didn't have a Zelda Direct, but instead it had overview trailers that were focusing on certain aspects in the game. And this is why also it makes sense. While if you have a dedicated Zelda Direct, it wouldn't fit the formula that we have seen. because Zelda Ocarina of Time Remake will never struggle to sell. This is a game that most likely is going to be able to sell 10 million plus. Over time, I think it could get up to 20 million if it is really well received and is that upgrade that we all hope it to be. But what do you think about Ocarina of Time Remake and Zelda 40th Anniversary possibility of a Direct? Sound off in the comment section down below. If you haven't already, then be sure to leave a like, subscribe and press the notification bell to not miss any upcoming Zelda videos. Last but not least, a big thanks to you for watching and to all our patreon.com/commonrealm patrons. With special shoutouts to our heroes, Cheryl, Garrett Hoy, Holly Wolf and Kintaro. You rock, and please enjoy these awesome videos.